The photo Wes keeps coming back to is not the one from 2 in the morning. It's the test shot, the one he took before he'd even pitched his tent. He was solo, 3 days out near Lake Colden, camped in a clearing 30 feet off the water with spruce and hemlock packed tight enough around it that you could not see more than 20 feet in any direction. He strapped a trail camera to a birch facing his site because he wanted to know what came through the clearing at night. People do this. It's normal. You get deer, you get a bear if you're lucky, you get a lot of wind triggers. Third morning, he pulled the card and sat on a rock by the water to scroll. Deer, a raccoon, an empty frame where the wind had set it off. More deer. Then 2:14 a.m. His tent in infrared, his boots outside it, his pack against the log. All normal. And at the tree line behind it, a vertical dark shape. He read it as a tree trunk. In grayscale, infrared a shadow can be anything, and he'd been fooled by a stump before. The next trigger was 3:47, and it was all still there. Tent, boots, pack, shape. At 5:12, the same again. He'd been running trail cameras for years, so he did the thing you do. Put his thumb on the screen where the shape was and flicked forward. 3 photos across 3 hours. His thumb never moved. Neither did the shape. That still wasn't enough to scare him. A tree doesn't move either. What did it was the light, because a stationary object photographed across a night does not photograph the same. The infrared bloom shifts. Edges soften as humidity climbs. Contrast changes as the temperature drops. Wes knew that from years of cards. Every other object in those frames, the log, his boots, the birch, changed slightly from photo to photo. The shape did not change at all. Not the edges, not the contrast, not one pixel of it, like the identical picture had been dropped into every frame. So he went back through day 2 when it had rained hard for a few hours after midnight. In those frames, his tent is beaded with water, and the ground has gone black with it, and the branches are hanging lower than they do in the dry shots. The shape is there. Same place, same outline, and nothing on it at all. And then he opened day 1. The test shot, taken when he'd mounted the camera and walked back toward the clearing to check the trigger. No tent in it. No pack, no boots. Just an empty clearing and the tree line. And the shape. It was there before his camp existed. It hadn't followed him in. He'd walked into the frame it was already standing in. He was packed and moving inside 20 minutes, and he did not stay a third night. He still backpacks. He won't use the same site twice now, and he doesn't read cards in the field anymore. That one he's firm about. He waits until he's home, with the door shut behind him, and even then he says he scrolls fast. If you've ever pulled a card out of a camera in the dark and scrolled with your stomach dropping, you know exactly what he felt. Quick one before the next account. How late is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments, I read everyone. And if this is your kind of thing, hit subscribe. We're pushing for 10,000 before the end of the month. Wes never saw his shape move. The next camera caught something over 4 nights, and on the 4th night it was close enough to touch the lens. Imani had a Park Service contract to document black bear movement in a drainage off the Appalachian Trail. 6 cameras across a 4-mile grid, checked every 72 hours. 5 of them gave her exactly what you'd expect: bear, coyote, turkey. The 6th sat deepest in a hollow you could only reach by a half-mile bushwhack off any trail. Night 1, it photographed the game trail, empty, and at the extreme right edge of the frame, just inside the sensor zone, a shape. About the height and width of a person, but too dark. That's the part she flagged first, because infrared is unforgiving, and it lights everything evenly. Leaves, bark, an animal's flank, a person's jacket. Everything else in that frame came back gray and detailed. The shape came back flat, with no highlight anywhere on it, like the light reached it and stopped. Night 2. It was in the middle of the trail. It had covered about 40 feet. And here's where Imani stopped treating it as an animal. That camera fires on motion. 40 feet of walking across its sensor zone should have produced a dozen frames. There were none. One photo of it at the tree line, one photo of it 40 feet closer, and nothing in between. No partial frames, no blur, nothing. She checked the mount, the sensitivity, the trigger delay. All of it was set the way she'd set the other 5, and the other 5 were producing normal walking sequences of bears and coyotes all week. Night 3, it was directly in front of the lens. The photo shows it from the chest down, because it had bent forward to bring itself to the camera's height. Not a crouch, not a lean. It was bent at one point, like a hinge rather than a spine. The arms hung straight, elbows locked, fingertips down near the knees. Where the torso folded at the waist, there was no fold. No gathered fabric, no crease of skin, no texture at all. The same flat surface ran all the way across the bend. Night 4 was almost entirely black. Something was pressed against the glass. In the middle of it, 2 small points of light, which are the camera's own infrared LEDs, bounced back off a surface about 2 inches from the lens. She hiked in and took it down. The lens was clean. No smear, no residue. She was unstrapping it when she saw the trunk. About 7 feet up, above where the camera sat, the bark had been scored. 4 parallel lines, evenly spaced, running nearly 8 inches down the tree, all cut to the same depth. She measured the spread between the outer 2 with her fingers. It was wider than her hand, and a hand dragged down bark hard enough to strip it does not leave 4 lines of the same depth, because your fingers are not the same length. She finished the contract. She asked for a different grid the next season, and she got it. She still does the work. She just doesn't do it alone anymore. She'd paddled 6 hours into the Boundary Waters and camped on a small granite island. Jack pine, bare rock, water on every side. One way on, one way off, and it was a canoe. She strapped the camera to a pine about 15 feet from her tent, set to burst mode, 3 frames a trigger. She slept badly the way you do the first night on the water, broke camp at dawn, paddled out, and didn't look at the card until she was home 3 days later, at her kitchen table on a laptop. The first triggers are her own movement setting up. Then dark for a couple of hours, then 1:17 a.m. Her tent zipped, campsite empty, and all 3 burst frames identical. Something had crossed the sensor and been gone before the first shutter fired, which on that camera is under a second. 1:42 a.m. Her tent again, but sitting at the right edge of the frame instead of the middle. She went back and forth between the 2 photos a few times before it registered. The camera had turned on its mount, a few degrees clockwise, enough to push the tent off center. She had strapped that camera on herself, and she had not been out of her sleeping bag once. 1:58 a.m. A photo of her tent from the side. Not from the pine. Not from anywhere near the pine. From the level of somebody standing at the edge of the campsite, holding a camera at about chest height, looking at her tent from an angle that does not exist unless the camera has come off the tree. 2:11 a.m. Dark water and the far shoreline. It had carried it down to the water's edge, 20-odd yards from where it had been mounted. 2:14 a.m. Pine, needles, and bare rock, and a shadow laid across them, thrown by the camera's own illuminator, stretching toward the tent. Whatever was carrying it was standing between the camera and where she slept. 2:19 a.m. The mesh window of her rainfly, close, and through the mesh, grainy and lit in infrared, Bridget's face. Eyes shut, mouth slightly open. The fine hairs on her cheek are in focus. Photographed from about 18 inches while she slept. She's never been able to look at that one for more than a second or two. The last frame is 2:21. Back on the mount, pointed at the tent, rotated a few degrees the other way from where she'd originally set it. Tent zipped, site empty. Everything as it was, and at the extreme bottom right corner, at the very edge of the sensor zone, a hand gripping the trunk beside the camera. 4 fingers over the bark, thumb wrapped around the far side. Bridget doesn't camp alone now. She's kept the card. She won't delete it, and she won't show it to anyone. She says the part she can't get past isn't the photo of her face. It's that the camera was back on the tree. If you made it this far, subscribe to Obscure Nights. That's all I'll ask. 3 campers. 3 cameras. New York, Tennessee, Minnesota, none of them connected. A shape that photographed identically across 3 hours through a rainstorm and in a frame taken before the tent went up. A figure that crossed 40 feet of a motion sensor without triggering a single frame, then folded at the waist to look into the lens and left 4 scored lines 7 feet up a tree. A camera that came off its mount, went down to the water, photographed a sleeping woman through her rainfly, and went back on the tree. All 3 units were working. The cards weren't corrupted. The photos aren't sensor artifacts or long exposures of nothing, which means every one of those cameras did exactly the job it was mounted to do. It photographed what was in front of it. Lesson 1. Do not review your cards in the field. Wes was sitting on a rock in an open clearing when he worked out what he was looking at, and he still had to break camp and hike out from there. Whatever is in your photos already knows where you are. Read them at home. Lesson 2. Check the frames from before you arrived. Every one of these people scrolled to the interesting part and skipped the setup shots. Wes's answer was in the test photo the entire time. 3 days of him sleeping 30 feet from it. Start at frame 1. Lesson 3. Trust the equipment over your own explanation. Imani had a camera that fires on motion and no motion frames, and that was the tell. Wes had a shape that didn't change while everything around it did. When your gear is telling you something impossible, believe the gear. Lesson 4. Mount your cameras where you can see them from the tent, or don't run one at all. Bridget's was 15 feet away, behind her, out of her sight line all night. A camera that watches your camp is only useful if something isn't standing in its blind spot. Thank you for trusting Obscure Nights with these accounts. If you have an encounter of your own, our submission email is in the channel bio. We read every single one. This is Obscure Nights, where the cases nobody talks about get told the way they actually happened. Good night.